You haven't seen them with their children, maybe. You haven't seen them with their grandmother. You haven't seen them at work. You haven't seen them in certain scenarios where they shine in different ways. And there's so much more to us and everything. And I'm just saying, like, your perception is limited. So open it up a little bit and don't think that the little perception you have is the truth, the way, the right. It's not. It's just your perception, and it's working for you until it's not working for you. And it's when it's not working for you, maybe you're too tunnel visioned, maybe you're too narrow in your vision. Your perception is too limited. So expand it, open it up. And it's not just about always seeing more, it's about seeing deeper.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
All right, everybody. We are here for another show with Brandon and Evan on Way of the Artist. And this one might make me a little bit impassioned at some point. I'm just going to warn you. I've been getting a little bit lit up on the last bunch of episodes we've had. But this one in particular, I think will bring up some interesting stuff. So the title of this, if you didn't read it, because you're just jumping into the next one, or just like I'm going to randomly pick, is Radically Rethinking Our Perceptions. And Evan and I talked a little bit about like what we might title this. And just so you know, it came from the origin of the ideas of how we learn, how we teach, how we guide each other, the way we kind of see what we learn and how we understand what we learn, and our relationship to what we learn, and our relationship to how we teach as well, I think relates to all of this. There's probably some other elements, but it was born a little bit out of that. And I think at the end of the day, at least my goal, and I'll just say this off the top, my goal is to help you and us as well, Evan and I, to disrupt certain limitations in the way that we perceive the world and mostly just kind of the program. There's a program I believe we're all kind of running on, a little bit autopilot. It's unquestioned. You don't notice it. It kind of runs in the background. And it's just mostly on the way you grew up, what you learned, the systems were put in. And sometimes those systems fail us, and they cause a lot of pain and suffering and angst and just difficulty later in life. And I think let's try and blow that all out of the water. Let's change this. Let's just look at how we do that. And that's what I got, Evan. I don't know. What do you got to say?
Yeah, no, that's a great introduction. And I'll just add on to that by bringing in perhaps some of my own context as to how this conversation for me got going, in terms of some of the things that you said and I said, and things that are interesting to me about this conversation, at least as far as maybe a good jumping off point. But one of the things about this conversation about radically rethinking our perceptions, one of the biggest ones that I see along these lines is our perceptions of right and wrong, especially as it pertains to an artist and anyone who's been in an artistic field. I can definitely attest to this, is, within acting, because acting is such an interpretive form of art. Right. Like all art forms are, but like acting is one of these things where you can have, a production can be run many times over hundreds of years, right? Like we're still performing Shakespeare and sometimes classic Greek, plays still get put up on in different places. So the potential for dozens, hundreds of people over the course of time playing the same, thousands of people playing the same roles, is a reality. So you have to get out of the idea as an actor pretty soon, that there's an idea of a right way to play it, even though a lot of actors get trapped in that, sometimes unconsciously. But that's just one of, to me, I see that as part of this thing that we are addressing, these things, these sort of attitudes, because sometimes it's not like somebody told us just like, oh, well, there is a right and a wrong. No, it's the way in which we behave in our society. We start to just adopt these attitudes and these mentalities sometimes without even really knowing that we have. And this right and wrong one is I think one of them, that just like, no, there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. And it's only one or the other. And, in terms of the artist perspective on it, it's just like, no, not really. That's not really the case. So, I'm excited to dive into some of these things a little bit deeper and see where we end up.
Yeah. One of the examples you brought up was from your class, or a class you're maybe about to do, but talking about like owning your role and the whole idea of, you were talking before we ever recorded just about how thinking that there's a right way to do the role is the one thing that's going to stop you from being able to make that role your own. That's what's going to stop you. And so if you look at our traditional school system, it rewards us for getting the right answer, probably 90 to 95% of the time. And that means that we walk into the world thinking that 90 to 95% of the time that being right is how you win. But when it comes to art, it's like, no, actually, that's how you lose. Ironically, if you do it right, you'll probably inevitably do it wrong, because doing it right is the most boring, most obvious, most cliche thing you could do. Mm-hmm. And when you are writing a script or, making a movie or doing an acting performance, and I'm sure painting a painting or writing a song or doing any of this stuff, there's kind of this obvious way that will probably appear. Like, this is what needs to be done. This is how to do it, and that is the thing you need to go, that is the first programmed idea. Like, that's the idea that's not my own. That's the idea that is so obvious. I need to look beyond it, or, and sometimes, occasionally, it's okay to go with the obvious, but that's going to be something that you're going to have to kind of figure out through experience and whatever. But my point is that, there's a real problem with this need to be right, and this thinking that right is somehow good and always the way to win and succeed. It just isn't. And unfortunately, most people, if you've gone to traditional elementary school or public school of any sort like that, you basically learn this: if I just get the right answer, I beat the game, I win. Mm-hmm. And then you get out into the real world, and that mostly doesn't work outside of doing a very basic job, which is probably very unfulfilling.
Yeah.
For most people, at least.
Yeah. There was something in there that you said, and it's also something that you had mentioned beforehand as well, that is important for us to touch on, which is this thing of authority. This thing of authority and that's another part of these perspectives that, you think that there's someone out there who knows the answer. There's just that there is an answer to all of these things. And that, I think, fits in line with a lot of this right and wrong stuff as well. Right. And, I think that we spend a lot of time and energy just trying to like find the person who has the answer for me. And the artist perspective is more of an internal one, right? It's just like, well, only you know what the right answer is, mm-hmm. right? Because look, it's not to say that, right and wrong doesn't exist on some level, because I do think right and wrong does exist, but it's not, right and wrong does not exist in this objective kind of way.
Yes.
Right? Like, it's not just something that's sitting there all the time. It's right and wrong is a fluid thing, right?
Well,
and so
can
there's,
I interrupt? Okay, hold on. Like, it is fluid for the most part, but there are things where right and wrong, they actually matter, mm-hmm. and we shouldn't just throw them out. but they're not, it's not all the time. And like a simple example of this is like math, right? It's okay. 2 + 2 is not 5. 2 + 2 is not 3. 2 + 2 is not 6. And 2 + 2 is not 7. 2 + 2 is 4. Mm-hmm. That is the right answer. Now, if you want to make an argument that 2 + 2 is not 4, then we're getting into the art of math. And maybe there's some value like in doing that, where you can kind of, play around in this atmosphere of whatever. But when we do need a reality to work from. We do need a certain kind of consistency and agreeable kind of, we can agree that this is this, and this is how this works. Like this is the system in which we put in place, and that's the system. And if you get the system wrong, the system breaks. So know the system. Now, it doesn't mean that the system is your God, and now you have to follow that system and like you can't ever do anything outside of it. But if you want to work within that system, which is the system of math, there is going to be a right and a wrong. And it helps because it's doing a certain job. Where it becomes an issue, and I think this is more about what you're talking about, is when we try to use math, for example, to solve problems that math cannot solve. Where we can try to use the right and wrong mentality in an area that doesn't work under the same rules as, say, math would work, where there is a clear right and wrong. So there's certain fields that this just does not carry weight. And so we need to have this kind of fluidity and flexibility, I think, is what you're kind of talking about. But I thought that was important to mention, because we're not just saying like, oh yeah, like make it up, just be whatever. That's not exactly what we're saying.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, this is not some sort of necessarily like moral relativism or anything like that. And I'm glad that you brought that up and clarified some of those points, because yes, absolutely, there are things, and like you mentioned, like within math, where there is a kind of importance, particularly if you are, say, like an engineer or something like that. Math matters. Like it's, if you're a physicist, really does, math matters, right? Like it's
the bridge will collapse otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. Right. There's real consequences to getting it wrong, and there are things that we have a certain kind of objective understanding with, that even though it's not perfect, right? Because we're always like, I just mentioned engineering. Engineering is advancing constantly, right? Like the way that we are able to build certain structures in ways that we've never been able to do it before, like that's all advancements. That's taking stuff and learning more than what we knew before. So it's not like engineering was all figured out, however many years ago, and we're just doing the same thing. Like it's an evolving process as well, right? So even then, like, so there's still like, well, there is a right and wrong in some senses, but there is still room for growth. There is still room for it to advance, and probably will never stop advancing in many regards, right? But in terms of this show and what we're doing, like Way of the Artist is concerned very much with the subjective reality. And subjective reality is a much more fluid type of place to be navigating, right? Some things do tend to be right and wrong in some regards, but more so, it's a moment-to-moment thing. It's like what's right for one situation might not be right for another situation, right? And what's wrong for one situation might end up being right for another one. So it's really more so what is appropriate, what makes sense, what works with in relationship to whatever present circumstance is going on, as opposed to there's some kind of fixed answer to all of it, and trying to have some kind of a fixed answer to everything. I think is the point that I'm that I'm trying to drive at with this one. And just one last thing, and I'll turn it back over to you. But it might seem like, okay, but you're just talking about the subjective side of things. And yes, subjective and objective, I mean, they're things that go together. They're both aspects of reality. The thing is that as human beings, we don't really live objectively. We live experientially, which is to say we are living in subjectivity.
Yes. That's
right?
a really important point.
Yeah. So that's not that we are not objective about certain things and at certain times, but we're human beings, we're emotional creatures. We have a subjective point of view on the world. We all are walking around with this. So I think that that's why it's important. And that's why, art exists to a certain extent, because it helps to express that subjective reality with which we're living in, right? That's full of meanings. It's just full of meanings and differences and nuances, as we talked about recently, right? Like it doesn't always have these concrete language for it, right? Because in many, you kind of pointed this out, but even something like math. Well, math is an invention. Math is still an abstraction to a certain degree. The world and the universe is not math, right? Math is a language in which we use to describe the universe.
Yes.
Right? And it does so very well in many ways, but it also does not entirely describe it either. There's describing the universe through math, and then there's describing the universe through poetry.
Yes.
Right? They each fulfill a certain function.
And there's a third, looking up at the stars and experiencing what you see. You know, there's like English as a language is what we're speaking, but every word that I'm using is just a symbol. And every symbol is being put together in a certain fashion, in a certain way, to try to communicate some type of concept or idea. And it's amazing that we can follow along, and I can say these words, and every single word is a different symbol, like a caveman drawing little symbols on a wall, and you're following them, and you're actually getting what I'm saying, and you're understanding, and I'm communicating in a quite advanced way, and so this is pretty interesting. It's pretty cool. But like, it's still, the end of the day, these words that are coming out of my mouth can never summarize and never actually give you the total clarity from my perception of what I'm talking about. And this is kind of the thing that, we don't always take into account, I think, where people kind of go, oh, like, yeah, I heard what they said. It's like, yeah, you heard what they said. And so then if someone says it again, you think, oh, well, I've already heard what they said. It's like I can guarantee you this. And I stand behind this 100%. What you think you know is a fraction of what it is. And how I know this is because I do this course, Timeless Storytelling. And I ask people questions. And over the course of this course, I probably asked people over 100 different types of questions, probably even more than that. I've never counted, but there's a bunch of questions, and some of them are very simple questions, like, what's a story? And so when I ask people, well, what's a story? They go, well, I don't know what a story is. I don't know what a story is. Okay, a story is this, da, da, da. You want to know what? Out of all the people that have been in there, nobody ever says the same answer. Nobody ever says it quite the same. Nobody ever articulates story. And you'll find that when you're in a group class doing this course, and that's just one of many questions, very simple question, very almost obvious question, but you'll find that you learn something from story just from hearing everyone's answer. Mm-hmm. And you thought you knew story, and you thought your way was story. And then you hear someone else summarize story, and then you realize, oh, wow, story's more and different. And I'm always learning from every single student that I ask this question from. They always kind of teach me something a little bit more about story as one specific example. So story is just a symbol, it's just a word, it's just an idea, but it carries with it this whole wealth of stuff. So when you say, what is a story? There's 700 probably answers that are right. So then what's the most right answer of the 700? I mean, when you get into that, it's like, who cares? You know what I mean? There's only a more full answer. There's only a more complete answer, a deeper answer, but it's not a more right answer. It's an answer with a body. And this is the real point I want to kind of get across, Evan. It's an answer with a body, because at first story was a stick man for you. But then someone else filled in some information, and all of a sudden, this stick man started to, have a physical structure. It started to have like body to it, bones, and then someone else described it, and you got the fingertip of story, which is a whole part of story, which maybe you just never really thought about. And so it goes on and on and on. And that's only one word. And how many words do we have in the English language, right? And this is the last point I'll say. It's the same as a caveman or woman drawing the picture of the bear on the cave and showing everyone what the bear looked like and what it did. And that's only one drawing of that bear, and it does not complete the whole bear. You know what I mean? It's just the image, and we understand it, but we don't necessarily experience it and know the depth of it, which is, I think, a big part of this conversation.
Yeah. And we're diving into like a really interesting one here. A very sort of philosophical wormhole, I suppose, rabbit hole, wormhole, whatever you want to say. But I like it. Because this whole notion of these things are all just ideas for things and abstractions for things, as you're talking about. Like there's the direct experience, right? Like which I love that you saw that, which is like, oh yeah, there's the math which describes the universe, there's the poetry that describes the universe, and then there's just experiencing the universe.
Yeah.
Right? You actually having direct experience without, and this is going down like the crazy sort of like mindfulness rabbit hole of like where there's no words for it, there's no descriptors, there's just direct experience with what is, which is, I think, a rare glimpse that we get from time to time when we're just sometimes when we're just dumbfounded by some awe-striking sight, right? And for a second, there's no thoughts, there's no words, and very quick, and maybe it lasts for like a second or two, and then, the words start coming back into our minds as we start to like, apply these abstractions to what we are experiencing, right? Which is a bizarre kind of phenomenon in and of itself. But it's interesting, like as you were talking, it made me think of, as some people might know, I have a continued fascination and love affair of sorts with Zen, with the Zen tradition and kind of a lot of its peculiarities. And what you were saying, it was just like, it made me think of, oh yeah, that's so interesting because, you think of something like the haiku, right? The form, like the 575 syllable piece of poetry. And much of what you can sort of observe about Zen art forms is their simplicity. They are, like Zen painting is about as few brush strokes as you can basically possibly do to make an image emerge from the paper. Likewise, the haiku is like you have a limited number of words to describe something. And in many ways, like there's these stories of Zen masters being asked to answer something or describe something, and they always kind of go, oh, it's a real pity that I must. It's really, because it just lent me a kind of perspective. What you were saying, it's like, oh yeah, because the problem is getting hung up on the words, right? It's just like, they're trying to show you the experience, like we were talking about, right? Like, no, the experience. And if too many words are just going to create a confusion. So the less that I can say, the better, right? Which is a general sort of attitude that comes out of that, talking about attitudes and and perceptions, right? It's like the less that I can say about this, the better, because otherwise it can become too complicated. Otherwise it can become too much of a distraction. But sometimes the right words at the right time can have a very powerful effect, right? So it's like kind of fitting in line with what we're talking about. It's not that words are wrong, because words are not wrong, like but the right words at the right time, which you only know through your attention and your presence, can have a tremendous effect. And in the Zen tradition, it can actually like smack a person into like having an awakening type of experience, right? And there's a lot of different funny stories about how that's happened for a lot of people. But yeah, I think it fits in really well with this conversation, and it's given me a perspective just on that. It's like, oh yeah, the less sometimes we can say, the better about certain things. Because yeah, it can become too complex for us to navigate at a certain point.
There's something about the unsaid that is not always rewarded and acknowledged in our society. And I think when you look at the haiku, it's like you say less and you paint a picture, and it leaves a lot of room for the imagination. And I think this is a big thing, especially for the artists out there, or people who want to at least have more of an artistic direction in their life. Like, there's so much that cannot really be said, otherwise it cheapens it. And so, there is something in the silence that's valuable, and there's something in the imagination of like you fill in the blanks, and like, I think of art a little more now as like, what I do is I set up the structure for you to fill in the blanks. And I look at it that way because I look at the audience or the viewer or the reader or whoever as a participant in the process. And I never used to look at it that way. I used to think that I had to do it all. I had to like paint every little detail, and I had to show them everything. And, in this kind of like almost like a motif, it would continually pop up throughout my journey as an artist, where I would remember hearing like, that the scariest horror movies back in the day were the movies with like the lowest budget, because they couldn't show the monster and people would imagine the monster. And I remember hearing those stories and being like, yeah, it's true. And it'd be like, and and it was little bits, like little stories like that. I started to realize, yeah, like, why am I trying to outwork someone's imagination? Why am I trying to do that part for them? Like, why don't I just set up the dynamic to let them decide what they think and how they feel? And I think it's kind of like, Evan, I think it goes back to our law of trust. You have to trust that you've set it up right, that you've, done it. And like, and not right, but like, because we're talking about this right, wrong, but like in the best way that you can, you know what I mean? And like, could there be a better way? Maybe, but like, it doesn't make it more right. But also, sometimes there's not really a better way. There's just a different way. And sometimes the different way is just your way. And I think a really important part of this whole conversation is that we learn a little bit like under the model that we have to know everything. And what I learned when I got into college was when I first started really learning, because I studied a lot of philosophy. Because once you start studying philosophy, you realize you don't know anything. And all you do is you find out more, and then it just has 10 more questions lined up behind what you just found out. And then you're like, okay, maybe if I find these next things out, then I'll know. And then it's just like, now you have 100 new questions and you're like, oh my God, I'm worse off than I started. But you're not, you're better off. It's just that you've realized what you don't know. And when you realize what you don't know, what it does for a student is it creates wonder and curiosity, which the school system, in my opinion, kills in traditional sense, because a lot of these things basically go, you got all the answers. You don't need any more curiosity or wonder. You already know it. So why would you have curiosity and wonder? And then you just kill yourself because like now you know everything. Like, good, you're done. Like, who cares, right? And like, what are you going to walk around, be a know-it-all? You don't know it all. You're so arrogant to think that you do, first of all. And second of all, it's not your fault. You were programmed and put into a system that basically gives you the belief that you can know. And really, I believe that if people walked into the world going, there's so much I don't know, here's the little bit that I think I know, and I'm going to contribute the little bit that I think I know to the massive amount that I don't. And maybe I can find some other people that know a little bit of things that I don't know, and they can help me put more of this puzzle together. And then we would be collective, community, we would work together. I mean, it's pretty obvious to me when you just simplify it down to that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hey everybody, this is Evan, and this episode is brought to you by my book. Yes, I recently released a book called The Actor's Awakening, Connecting Spirituality to Craft. Expand yourself as an actor and your craft through a spiritual perspective. Take a journey that will explore universal philosophies and insights to help you understand human nature in a profound way, and develop practices to take your work to another level. Again, that's The Actor's Awakening, Connecting Spirituality to Craft, available on Kindle and paperback on Amazon. And as always, if you like the show, please subscribe. Yeah. And it's like, it's like this thing of another thing I always like to share with actors is, as far as like a change in perspective, is this thing of like, you're never done.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's, you're not done until production is over. Right? Like it's, which is, I think, a common misconception that I know I had and that I've seen in other actors, which is like, oh, okay, now it's, we've done our rehearsals and all of that, and now it's all finished, and it's just about recreating what we did in our best rehearsals. And it's like, that's just a terrible idea. Why the fuck would you even want to keep acting at that point? Like, why would you want to continue on with the performance if it's all just done and settled and you just sit and doing the same thing over and over and over and over again? It's like, you're not done. You're still learning. And if you're not at least open to still learning something about this story, about this part that you're playing, this person that you are playing, if you're not open to being surprised still in the middle of performance, your performance is dead.
Mm-hmm. Like,
you're completely dead in the water. So it's like, yeah, like we take things and we learn things and we ask questions, and we there are things that we can do to help set ourselves up, right? But I honestly think that what you need to set up is really just like, all right, set yourself up in the best position to respond. Really, it's just like, you have to set yourself in the best way that you can respond, that you've got like basically just some footing, you've got a platform underneath you, but then you've got to be present. You've got to be engaged with the actual real time, right now feedback that you're getting in order to be able to intelligently respond. Like that should be absolutely obvious to all of us, but it isn't, because most of us, and I'm guilty of this as well. So like, I'm not saying like, oh, I'm doing this and everybody, you need to start doing this now. No. I get caught up in this shit all the time, because this is, again, part of how, so many of us have been sort of conditioned, in our lives. And and it's been like this for generations and generations and generations, right? So like what we're talking about is like, we're trying to break some pretty deeply ingrained patterns, not only within ourselves, but things that have been in our societies and cultures for such a long time. But it should be perfectly obvious that the only way to intelligently respond to anything that is happening is through presence, not through some idea you have from something that happened before. Right? No, the only way to intelligently respond is to be actually in contact and aware of what is actually happening right in front of you right now.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not really how we conduct ourselves. Like we live in we choose to more so live in a world of assumptions, right? Beliefs, all of these things that we think we know about how things are, right? And from that attitude, we aren't able to see what's right in front of us. We're not open to actually learning more, right? Which is, again, that's a never-ending process. You'll always be learning. You'll always be evolving. You'll always be growing. The most advantageous place to be is from this letting go of all of that shit kind of space. Letting go of that, like, I have to be right. Like we're like, look at what we're seeing right now in our world with the amount of confusion and hostility and partisanship that we see in our world. Like, everybody's locked into their ideas of how they think things are, what they think is right and wrong, and everybody's just fucking screaming at each other. And very often, I have found that, like, whenever I find myself which thankfully I don't find myself in this situation very often, but when I'm talking about any kind of potentially hot button issue with somebody, and there's perhaps some area where there's a perceived disagreement and there's suddenly a hostility that I sense coming my way, very often the question I ask is, what do you think that I think? What is it that you think that I think? Because so often, and not just in my own life, but I've observed this, like, in, from friends and family telling me stories as well, where it's like, when you actually just calm down with each other and you actually, with honest, open, curious communication and kindness, acting in good faith towards one another, you discover that, like, oh, we actually don't have a disagreement on the subject. or you realize that you have a whole shit ton of assumptions about the other person and what they think, right? And that's being perpetuated all over the place. It's just like, oh, you think that? Well, then it must also mean that you also think this, and this.
Yes,
thing.
yeah.
And it's like, hold the fucking phone for a second here. like, where did you get that from? This is, I'm just illustrating this. I'm not trying to make even though I am making a bit of a social point here, I want to use this more so put the focus back on this is as an illustration of kind of a thing that's going on for like how many of us are operating, how most of us are operating, right? Where we're actually living in these assumptions and these ideas and beliefs about what things are, how things are, who people are, all of this shit. We're caught up in these images and abstractions of each other and not actually involved with the actual thing and with the actual person. We're not even, it seems like we're not even interested in actually finding out, which is maybe for me, sometimes the most depressing part of it. It's like, are we not even interested in really knowing? Or are we all so caught up in our ideas of right and wrong that we're no longer actually talking to each other anymore?
Yeah. There's so much stuff you're bringing up. and it does relate to art. Like, especially in film, because it's so collaborative and you got to work together. And especially when you're starting out and you're working together and maybe you don't have a lot of money to just pay everybody and say, shut up and work. Not that you would, but I mean, some people do. I mean, that's the reality in this industry. But, and a lot of people are there for goodwill, good faith, the project of love and passion. People still have an ego and they still have their own desires and their own things and whatever else. And I think the thing is before you ever tell anybody else what to do, unless like you're running some type of thing and you've invited them and they've agreed to be a part of whatever you're building. But if you're just going to approach somebody or say to somebody, like, you should do this as though you know the way, check yourself. Because if you don't understand why they're doing it their way, then you have no right whatsoever to ever tell them what to do. And this is the narcissism of our culture, where people are so arrogant that they will tell other people what to do without even understanding why someone's doing what they're doing. And they make these assumptions, Evan. They say, oh, you're doing it because of this. And maybe, to bring this into a geopolitical thing, maybe they saw that on the news and the news told them people do this because of that. And you're just a fucking parrot now. You're repeating what you heard from someone else. Stop. Stop. Take a breath. You do not know why most people are doing what they're doing for sure, for certain. You just don't know. Try to say the same thing at the same time, certain and sure. But anyway, look, you don't know. So you need to have curiosity. You need to open up and say, like, okay, like, maybe someone even agrees with you, but they might not agree with you for the same reasons you think it's that way. They might think it's that way for other reasons. There's a lot of assumptions. We try and fill in the back end of all of this stuff with all this information. And now, why is this important? Well, one, I mean, look, you'll get along with your neighbor a lot better if you understand them. And you won't get into silly fights and make dumb assumptions about other people that you just don't know. And actually, really, at the end of the day, you're the ignorant ass if you do that, not them, you. So you won't be an ignorant ass and you'll get along with people better. You'll make more friends. You might even expand your view. You might actually get through to someone and help them over to your way if your way is actually a better way. But you'll test those ideas and they'll understand why you're coming at it. You'll understand why they're coming at it, and you'll work together in a collaborative way. Okay, so that's one thing. But the next thing is like, you'll make better art together. You'll do better things together. Because look, like, a lot of people make assumptions that people do things for certain reasons. And like, you don't know why people do a lot of what they do. And I brought this up in the other podcast, is like, why do people put money into a film? Well, some people, maybe, I don't know, put money into a film because they look at it as an investment, and it's a bit of a risky investment, but you can make a lot of money back if you get involved with the right projects. So some people do it because of the financial gain and potential of, putting a little money in or whatever. Some people do it because they want to be around movie stars. Some people just want to have the experience of being involved in a film, or they want their name on the credits. Some people, for them, it's about going to the after party. Some people, it's about, I have this project I want to create, and it's all about me creating it, and I just want to create it. Or I want to be a part of someone that's creating something great, and I want to work with them. There's all sorts of reasons why you might do something. We don't all do them for the same reasons. And so if you don't know why people do what they do, don't ever tell them what to do, because their reasoning for them is really, really good. And if you don't even care enough to hear their reasoning, then they're never going to care what your point of view is either, because you don't care about them. So why should they care about you? So at the end of the day, what am I saying? It comes down to care. It comes down to caring. And caring is about, letting go of your ego and your narcissism and your arrogance. And look, we're all a little arrogant. We've all done it. You're not a bad person. It doesn't, just everybody, like, it's part of also the way you were programmed, and it's part of the way that you were conditioned. You were conditioned to make assumptions, unfortunately, in this society. So I'm going to say it again. Stop. 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 You have your opinion. You think it should be this way. Maybe it's your artistic project. Someone else, maybe the producer, I don't know, they think it should be this way. Do you know why they think it should be this way? Do they know why you think it should be this way? Are you hearing each other? Stop. Figure out the why. The why is so much more important than the what. And this will totally drastically and radically evolve your perception of making moves in the world. It's so important.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it's like, it's true. Sometimes we get so caught up on the surface level of things, right? And we make the mistake of thinking that is the most important thing to put the focus on, when so often you can just, if you go a little bit of a layer deeper, you can often find out, what this is actually all about. Right?
Yeah.
Like it's like, this isn't actually about, this isn't actually about me not vacuuming the house.
A domestic argument or something.
Yeah, right. Like this is actually what it's about. Just to
Yeah, totally. That's a great example. That's a wonderful example, because then you get in this crazy fight about something, and it's not even about that really.
Yeah. It's about something much deeper. It's about someone not feeling heard. It's about someone not, not feeling like they're getting enough time with you, or something like that, right? Like it's usually there's something more, and it was just the vacuuming that was the straw that broke the camel's back, right? Like, is it about the vacuuming? Kind of, but not really, not fundamentally, and that's again, I think, very often the case with how we operate. So often, right? Like we get so caught up on the surfaces of things.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
And I think it makes our art and our expression shallow. And I think that sometimes we just don't know that that's why, and like at the end of the day, I mean, I would say this to everybody, like, the way I talk sometimes to our audience is like a little bit, in my opinion, maybe to some people they love it, maybe some people hate it, but I talk a little bit assertive at times, where I'm just like really, I really try to be direct. And when I'm trying to be direct, the reason why I do that is, now you can maybe understand, because maybe you don't like it, but the reason why I do it is because I found, for me, sometimes I just needed someone to be really direct. And when people were like, Brandon, stop, think, and they were like, like, I'm going to kick your ass a little bit, like something my dad used to say to me. We have a funny relationship, but regardless, I'm going to kick your ass a little bit. I actually appreciated that, because sometimes, I was so caught in my thing, doing my thing. And then someone goes like, here, like, just look, you know what I mean? And there can be something good about that, but don't feel ashamed if you get caught doing, quote unquote, the wrong thing. That you're doing something ignorant, or you're doing something dumb, or you're doing something arrogant, or you're being egotistical. Don't make yourself a bad person for that. Understand that we all do that in certain ways, right? And just go, okay, look at me. I'm getting into a tunnel vision here. I think I know everything. I'm being a little arrogant about what I think I know, or I'm being a little narcissistic and not thinking about what other people actually think and why they're doing what they're doing. Just catch yourself, and then stop, and then go. And I think it's and I think, like, just to go back to that one little topic about talking direct with people, I also talk pretty compassionate with people. And there are moments in this podcast where I cry out from my most vulnerable place for you guys to reach up into your heart and let that run your life, and not let the world stomp it out. So there are different shades of me. But if you only saw me be direct to you, like, oh, Brandon, that guy's an asshole, he's a blah, 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 I think blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, you haven't seen all the sides. And just what I'm saying about that is that your neighbors, you haven't seen all the sides of them. You haven't seen them with their children, maybe. You haven't seen them with their grandmother. You haven't seen them at work. You haven't seen them in certain scenarios where they shine in different ways. And there's so much more to us and everything. And I'm just saying, like, your perception is limited. So open it up a little bit, and don't think that the little perception you have is the truth, the way, the right. It's not. It's just your perception, and it's working for you until it's not working for you. And when it's not working for you, maybe you're too tunnel visioned, maybe you're too narrow in your vision. Your perception is too limited. So expand it, open it up. And it's not just about always seeing more, it's about seeing deeper. I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, it is an important point, Brandon. It is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, man, okay, there's a couple other things I want to say.
Yeah, go for it.
We have this moment. I think, look, like, I'm a big believer in education. I think education is one of the most important ways to help the world move forward. And the more people are educated, the better off we are, because lacking education tends to be the thing that causes a lot of the problems if you look with people, because when you don't have options, when you don't have awareness, the world can be very confusing and you can be very limited in your choices. If your only choice to get the way you want is to get angry about it, then you're going to have very limited options. You're going to probably ruffle a few feathers and you're going to run into problems, right? So education is important. But that being said, not all education is always really good for you. And I think that we need to be more critical about the way we learn. And I think that whenever you're learning anything, even, like listening to me talk right now, I mean, just take it with a grain of salt, right? Like, don't just take it like it's the way, like this is the answer. Like, I'm still working from the best that I got, and I'm improving all the time. And so I'm giving you the best I got, but it's not the way, it's not the answer. Like, nobody has the way or the answer. And you need to look at it in terms of everything you learn. Don't take it as the truth, as the way, as the fact, as the right answer. Consider it as an option. And if it's the best option you have, you can work with it. But the way I've learned to look at things is, this is the best I have to work with at the moment. But if someone introduces me to a better idea, I am fully willing to abandon this idea and jump on board that one, because this one would be obsolete and out of date. I'm not going to hang on to it and be like, this is the way, I'm right, I've always used this. My parents always used it. My grandparents always did it this way. It's like, who gives a shit? There's a certain time where you need to kind of go, look, this thing that I've been doing, the way I've been looking at it, it's out of date. It's running out. It wasn't complete enough. And maybe it's not a full jumping ship. Maybe it's just a little bit more like building a wing. It's like adding a little bit more to the idea, fleshing it out a little bit more, but just look at things as, I think, Evan, you put it, kind of in process, in progress, and in a consistent kind of constant development.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Because I think the answer,
go for it.
Yeah, the answer, right. Well, this is the last thing I'll say then. The answer being I'm right is as assuming you have the complete and full answer, both with width and depth and everything, that's the only way. So you could be like, you might be right about some of it, but maybe not all of it. So don't assume that you are 100% right on everything, and that's my point. Yeah.
Yeah. The world and life is such a massive, sort of weaving of really an infinite amount of things, and we don't always have the whole picture as much as we often think that we have the whole. I mean, here we are saying a bunch of things on this podcast, we don't have the whole picture, like we're offering maybe a glimpse of the picture, right? But this is our glimpse of some of the picture, and it's we don't have access to the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Most
but we're
of us.
also not saying like don't listen to another podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're saying like this is a take. This is an artistic take on
Yeah.
some ways you can go about life. It's not, it's a part of the whole picture. It's not the picture.
Yeah. Listen to us, listen to some other people, but most importantly, like listen to yourself.
Yes. Well, cheers, man. Let's talk about beer, I think.
All right. Yeah, let's do it. I'm actually drinking one that I had a few weeks ago. I didn't have time to head out and grab a fresh one, but it's still good. I'm drinking the Shipwreck IPA from Lighthouse Brewing Company in Victoria, BC, and I knew what I was getting with this one again, so it's like I was and it's delicious. It is a tasty brew. So yeah, enjoyed, helped fuel this conversation for sure.
Nice. I don't think I've had this one before, although I might have. It's from Sawback, which is a brewery that I've been frequenting a little bit. They're in Alberta. It's a craft lager, and it's called Hammer Down. But what's interesting is with this beer, I had another beer called Hammer Down, but it was from a different company. So there's two beers out there in Alberta, both called Hammer Down, but this one's from Sawback. Anyway, yeah, it's a tasty little brew. I like it. Everything they've put out, I've been digging, and that's what I'm drinking today.
Nice.
So,
Nice.
Final thoughts, my man. Let me go first.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll say this. Your artistic expression is it, there's so much more than the obvious. And I really think that as an artist, developing the ability to dig deeper is so important. If you ever want to find out what your true voice, your true vision, your true expression is. And it's not always easy, but to give you a step in the right direction, at least in a direction, considering we're talking about right and wrong, but to give you a step in a direction I think is helpful, is that your first idea and your first concept and your first initial opinion, that should always be up for question and always be up for debate. For you, not like you don't have to share that with everybody and doubt yourself, but just be like, hey, this is how I think this is. This is how I think this works. This is I think what this should be. But I think what you want to do is do this kind of exercise. Just go stop. Okay, that's my first idea. That's the way I'm looking at it right now. And then what I like to do is ask like why. Why do I want to do this? Why do I think it's this way? Get into the depth, like, and then, well, why that, and go deeper. And we've done this before on the podcast, and we've talked about this in various ways, but why will help you get into your reasoning. It'll help you dig deeper. And then as you get into that reasoning, you'll start to find some kind of fodder, something you can use, something you can work with. And then you can ask questions about that. And so something that I kind of learned through filmmaking, maybe this will just kind of like finish the point. But when I first learned how to make films, when I first made films, let me kind of go this way. When I first made films, before I knew anything, all I did was follow my gut. And my films were actually pretty good because I didn't know anything, but they could use some work, right? And that's part of what learning about film does for you. But then I started to kind of do things the right way. And then, it took something away, it's like it was done right, but it wasn't done with a lot of like my signature, my vision, my voice. And I would say like, then I started to realize I'm like, okay, well, yeah, like I captured it, but like what I need to do is I need to infuse it with my experience of it, my vision, my feeling. And so just to give a kind of an example, in the last film I did, which by the way, I just won an award, which is kind of cool. So I won an award, but one of the scenes was this scene where this guy comes home and he finds his wife cheating on him with her masseuse. And like, obviously the context of the scene is, that's devastating. What a betrayal, all that, right? There's all this obvious stuff. But when I was thinking about it, I was walking around thinking about, okay, how am I going to film this scene and what's going to look like? And I was like, well, you're in hell. That would be like hell. And it was from the perception of the guy, perception. And so I'm like, okay, it's got to feel like hell. And so I kind of got this idea, like I want this red lighting in the room, and then um, I want like this like low hanging fog, and then like I want this guy because it's a comedy too, so I could get away with some stuff, so I could play a little bit. I mean, maybe in a more realistic or direct type of film, you wouldn't be able to do this, but I was. So I was like, well, let's play, let's have some fun with it. I wanted his body glistening. So I got them to like oil up his body. And this guy had like massive pecs and, abs and everything. And he turns them. And also like I want to have these, like, there's these movies and stuff where I saw where people like kind of just whip their head. And I find that really funny. So I want him to like whip his head to like look at him. And then you just, and I all these little elements, they made that scene like kind of magical, a little larger than life, but it was like a really good little scene, But it could have just been he walks in, sees his wife cheating on him, and he's really devastated. But this made it funny, and it made it experiential. And so my point is that there's the obvious, and then you dig a little deeper and start to find out, where you fit into it all, and whatever that means, and then play. So, and have some curiosity and have some fun.
I have to see this film, Brandon. I haven't seen your film yet. So let me know when and where we can all see it.
Sure, I'll show you.
Yeah. All right, man. Radically rethinking our perceptions. This has been an interesting one. We went down some rabbit holes. I definitely had some of my own perceptions sort of shifted and given some new perspectives around certain things, which is fantastic. Like it's nice when the thing that you're talking about is something that actually happens in the conversation. What occurred to me at some point is, and Brandon, you're familiar with this one because I've said it many times, but it's my favorite poem. My favorite poem by Rumi. Beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the words each other don't make any sense. I love that poem. I still love that poem. It's still my favorite. It's been all over this conversation, that poem. And yeah, there is a space that within us, and in relationship to each other and to the world and everything that is beyond right and wrong. And I think that is, and not only that, but the poem implies that this is a pretty good space to occupy. It doesn't mean that we just suddenly stop thinking and that we suddenly start letting horrible things happen and just allow people to behave in shitty ways to others or to ourselves. Doesn't mean any of that. But I like to think that within that poem, it's saying that it's in many ways precisely because of the thinking of right and wrong that we behave in shitty ways to each other. If we can go beyond right and wrong, there's a whole different world for us to occupy and to live and to exist and to experience. And just play with that. Just play with that in your life. Let go of trying to be right or other people being wrong, and see if you can start listening to people, to others more deeply, and maybe even yourself a bit more deeply too. And just explore, discover, and grow. Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.